At 4:30 in the afternoon, on June 14, 1969, Dennis Martin stepped away from 3 other children near Spence Field in Great Smoky Mountains National Park and never came back. 5 minutes later, according to his father, the adults were already calling his name and searching the nearby trails. Hours afterward, park headquarters logged the missing child report at 8:28 that evening. Before sunrise, a violent storm had dumped roughly 2.5 inches of rain across the mountain, swelling streams, flattening vegetation, and attacking whatever trail a child might have left. Within days, rangers, soldiers, special forces personnel, rescue squads, Boy Scouts, helicopters, woodsmen, and hundreds of volunteers were pouring into the search. Eventually, roughly 1,400 people would be involved at its peak. Somewhere inside those numbers sits the contradiction that keeps this case alive. How does a child disappear within minutes of his family noticing, then leave no confirmed trace, after one of the largest searches the park had ever mounted? June 14th was the Saturday before Father's Day, and the Martin family had gone into the Smokies for a camping trip. Dennis had spent the previous night with his father, grandfather, and older brother at Russell Field, before the group moved about 2 miles east to Spence Field. There, several boys decided to slip into the brush and surprise the adults. Because Dennis took a different route from the others, the last ordinary moment of the afternoon became the first unanswered question. Park records often describe Dennis as 7, although the same file gives his birth date as June 20th, 1962, meaning he was 6, just 6 days from his 7th birthday. Nothing about the prank required him to travel far. Still, his father later said, only about 3 to 5 minutes passed before the family realized Dennis had not emerged. That narrow window matters, because every explanation has to fit inside it first. Other boys reached the adults as planned. Only Dennis did not. Immediately, family members began checking the nearby ground. Nearby trails were searched in both directions. Nobody answered back. Quickly, if you like investigations that follow the evidence without murdering the mystery, like the video, subscribe, and support the channel before the algorithm reports us missing too. His father later told investigators something that made that silence more troubling. Dennis was a quiet child who would not normally call out, although he would answer strangers. Meanwhile, Dennis's grandfather started the long descent toward Cades Cove to reach park personnel. Official notification did not reach headquarters until hours later, because remote mountain communication in 1969 meant trails, radios, distance, and time. Around dark, thunderstorms moved across the high country. Rain turned paths slick, streams dangerous, and tracking into guesswork. By morning, one explanation already looked possible. Dennis may have become lost, injured, or trapped somewhere close enough to be missed. Unfortunately, the same weather that made that explanation plausible also began erasing the evidence needed to prove it. Sunday brought experienced park personnel into drainages below Spence Field, while Boy Scouts, horse parties, rescue squads, and other teams checked trails. Monday expanded the operation to roughly 300 people, with military support and special forces personnel joining the effort. Tuesday pushed the force higher again, as searchers recovered Anthony Creek, nearby ridges, streams, and routes that seemed remotely possible. Saturday saw the operation peak near 1,400 people, and by then, the immediate area around Spence Field had been searched repeatedly. Numbers that large sound reassuring. Archived records make them less reassuring. Rhododendron, mountain laurel, steep slopes, rock formations, creek beds, and hidden drainages create pockets of ground that are difficult to see, even when searchers pass nearby. More importantly, the Park Service's own review admitted that the response had grown faster than its organization. Officials wrote that people kept expecting Dennis to be found in the next hour, so the structure needed for a prolonged operation developed late. Crew leaders familiar with the terrain were limited. Logging of search activity was not properly established until several days into the response. Tracking dogs produced no reliable trail. Future recommendations specifically stressed getting experienced trackers and dogs into an area early, before search parties could obliterate sign. Ironically, the enormous effort to find Dennis may have made certain kinds of evidence harder to recover. Aircraft offered no magic solution, either. One attempt to use a plane for broadcast work ended after the aircraft was damaged during landing, while another effort to project Dennis's father's voice from a helicopter was hindered by engine noise. Technology was present, but the mountain did not care. Here, the second mystery finally appears. Even with all that manpower, why did so many people find nothing? Part of the answer may be scale. Calculations made by June 22 put general search coverage at more than 56 square miles, including roughly 12.5 square miles, searched intensively. Coverage, however, is not the same thing as every hollow, thicket, crevice, stream bank, and concealed drop being checked perfectly. A Special Forces officer later told reporters that if his men had searched an area and failed to find Dennis, then Dennis was not there, a statement that intensified speculation that the boy had somehow left the search zone. No surviving evidence, however, established that Dennis actually had. This contradiction sharpened the entire case. Remaining somewhere inside the territory being covered meant hundreds of trained searchers had somehow missed him. Conversely, getting beyond that territory required a 6-year-old to travel far enough, fast enough through difficult mountain country, without leaving a confirmed trail. Both possibilities ended at the same problem. Nobody could prove either one. 1,400 searchers did not arrive at once. Weather had already moved through. Foot traffic had already multiplied. Vegetation had already swallowed sight lines. Time was winning. Then, investigators received a lead that pulled the case in a darker direction. Elsewhere in the park, a visitor reported seeing what he described as a suspicious person. Later accounts also describe a scream and characterize the stranger as rough-looking or unkempt. Crucially, surviving accounts do not agree cleanly on the exact timing, distance, or every descriptive detail. National Park Service records do confirm that the suspicious person lead was serious enough for the witness to return with FBI and park personnel to identify the location. Physical evidence, however, never connected that person to Dennis. Likewise, investigators never established that any reported scream came from the missing child. Authorities never identified a suspect who could be placed with Dennis at Spence Field. Neither a ransom demand nor a confirmed vehicle trail appeared. Kidnapping therefore explains one thing very well: why a body might never be found near the meadow. Supporting evidence for that explanation is another matter. Geography creates an additional problem. Depending on which later account is used, the suspicious sighting occurred several miles from Spence Field, and estimates of the route vary. Connecting the two events requires Dennis, an abductor, or both to cover difficult mountain terrain within a limited period. Possible does not mean probable. Nevertheless, the report survives because it gives the mystery something the lost child theory lacks: another human being who might explain why Dennis vanished completely. Another celebrated clue involves tracks. Subsequent accounts describe child-sized impressions near water, including what some writers characterize as a print resembling an Oxford shoe. Contemporary Park Service summaries are far less dramatic. Retrospective documentation says no confirmed trace was found, and specifically includes footprints among the missing evidence. Consequently, any shoe print story has to remain an uncertain lead, not proof that Dennis reached a particular drainage. Searchers may have encountered an ambiguous print and failed to distinguish it from marks left by other children or search teams. Retellings may later have combined several weak track reports into one cleaner clue. Either explanation is less exciting than a perfect footprint pointing toward a hidden route, but evidence does not become stronger because a story improves with age. Wildlife raised another grim possibility. Field teams investigated possible animal signs and suspicious odors, but nothing tied wildlife to Dennis. Predation remains possible, yet no confirmed physical evidence supports it. Exposure requires fewer assumptions. Any 6-year-old moving downhill could enter a drainage quickly, become disoriented, slip, shelter beneath thick vegetation, or reach water, just as storms transform small streams. Heavy rain can flatten tracks, reduce scent, shift loose material, and move objects far from where a searcher expects to find them. Cold, wet conditions also turn a survivable mistake into an emergency. None of those mechanisms proves what happened. Together, though, they explain why the first night mattered more than the enormous search that followed. Public attention created a different kind of problem, as volunteers, reporters, callers, and people with theories competed for attention while the operation expanded. Psychics began contacting park officials too, and the Park Service later acknowledged but that time was spent checking some of those predictions, without useful results. Apparently, even a mountain search can develop its own paperwork for clairvoyance. Managers eventually asked broadcasters to stop directing additional volunteers toward the high country, because the search zone had reached saturation. Additional manpower, at that point, did not automatically mean more clarity. Late June forced the question nobody wanted to answer. Manpower fell from more than 1,000 people to hundreds, then to dozens as military units and helicopters withdrew. On June 29, family members, park officials, and an FBI agent met to discuss what could realistically be done next. Records show the large organized effort ended that evening, although experienced park employees continued limited searching afterward. September brought the formal end of the operation, after nearly 3 months without a confirmed trace. Measured through June 29 alone, Park Service records list more than 13,400 man-hours and over $50,000 in direct personnel, equipment, and supply costs, excluding some absorbed expenses. History turned those numbers into proof that Dennis should have been found. Operational reality says something narrower. An enormous search can reduce the odds of missing a child without reducing those odds to zero. Decades passed, and the absence of an answer created room for additional stories, but none produced verified remains or physical evidence identifying what happened to Dennis. Today, the FBI vault contains a large release case file, while the National Park Service still treats the disappearance as unresolved. So, how much of the famous mystery survives when the folklore is stripped away? First, the astonishingly short window survives. Second, the severe first-night weather survives. Third, the enormous search survives, but the idea that every inch was perfectly checked does not. Fourth, the suspicious person report survives as a genuine investigative lead, though no evidence establishes a connection to Dennis. Fifth, the footprint stories weaken, because no print was ever confirmed as his. Finally, later claims remain claims, without recoverable physical evidence. Stripped down, the disappearance becomes less paranormal and more disturbing. Misadventure fits the documented facts best. Fundamentally, Dennis, intentionally separated from the other boys during a prank, entered vegetation on his own, and had only minutes before adults noticed he had not returned. Terrain offered multiple downhill routes, dense cover, and places where a small person could disappear from sight almost immediately. Nightfall brought worsening conditions. Before the search could fully organize, trampled ground weakened tracking. Communication delays cost time. Organizational overload complicated coordination. Storms damaged sign. Those factors form a credible chain without requiring an unknown attacker, secret operation, or extraordinary event. Drowning or a fatal fall could fit inside that chain, although neither has been demonstrated. Hypothermia or exposure also fits the weather and Dennis's age, yet no body establishes either cause. Animal involvement remains possible, but the search produced nothing specifically pointing toward predation. Abduction remains possible as well, especially because of the suspicious person lead, but possibility is doing most of the work there. Surviving evidence does not demonstrate that Dennis encountered that person, entered a vehicle, was carried away, or became the victim of a crime. Government cover-up theories have even less support, because no surviving document establishes that authorities found Dennis, or learned what happened, and concealed it. Paranormal explanations require the largest leap of all, since they explain the missing evidence by introducing something for which there is even less evidence. Such ranking matters. Mystery is not a contest, where every theory gets the same trophy. Question 1 is why Dennis probably disappeared. Most likely, a child's attempt to circle through the woods became a navigation mistake that placed him outside the area his family expected him to be. Next comes the question of why the evidence looks almost non-existent. Combined rain, terrain, vegetation, delayed tracking, contaminated ground, moving water, and an expanding search provide a reasonable answer. Investigators lacked the body, confirmed trail, or physical clue needed to reconstruct the final event. Human abduction theories grew powerful because they offer a clean reason for the absence of remains, even though evidence connecting that witness report to Dennis never appeared. Longevity comes from the gap between what probably happened and what can actually be proved. Its leading explanation is plausible without being provable. Minutes created the first gap. Everything afterward made that gap harder to close. Downhill movement may have taken Dennis away from the places searchers expected him to be. Floodwater may have moved evidence beyond the areas checked most intensively. Dense cover may have hidden him within ground crossed repeatedly. Alternatively, the suspicious person lead may have mattered in a way investigators never managed to prove. Every theory still has to return to the same afternoon and explain the same tiny window. Initially, Dennis separated from the other children. Adults noticed within minutes. Rescuers came by the hundreds. Downpour came first. Yet after all of it, nobody has ever produced confirmed physical evidence proving what happened to Dennis Martin after he stepped into the woods. Perhaps the simplest explanation has been in front of us all along. Ordinary terrain may not have made Dennis disappear, so much as given one small mistake, enough weather, distance, confusion, and time to become permanent. Until somebody can explain those first few minutes, with evidence instead of possibility, Spence Field keeps its final answer. Thanks for watching, and if another mystery deserves the same evidence-first treatment, I'll see you there.